the recording. And Kate, I will go ahead and turn it over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Mary, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to our first webinar of 2024. So thank you for joining, and on a Monday too, which is unusual for our lineup. So great to see so many of you joined today. I'd like to introduce you to Mary Hannah. Some of you will know Mary from before, so she'll be delivering our session today, How to Negotiate When Dealing with Third Parties. As most of you know, we do record the session, and I will send you all the recording afterwards. But we also load it on the YouTube channel and our webinar on demand page as well for anyone that you want to share it with. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mary. Just to mention that we will put you all on mute during the session, but there's times I'm sure Mary will bring you off mute or ask you to come on camera during certain parts of the webinar, but I'm going to leave that one to Mary. But yeah, Mary, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kate, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening for some of you. Again, my name is Mary from Master Connection Associates, and excited to be spending the next hour with you talking about negotiating, which is also a topic that I'm very passionate about. So as Kate had said, throughout our time and throughout the next hour, I do encourage your participation. So I like to say, be proud out loud. So if you do have a question or a challenge or something that you want to bring up, one way is you could type that question or challenge right into the chat box if needed. Or the other thing is you can use the reactions button. And with those reactions button, you can raise your hand or give a high five or a smiling something, and then you'll go right to the front of my screen so I can go ahead and actually see you. So we do encourage, as I said, if you want to come on camera, I'd love to see your face because it's nice to talk to a face versus just staring at my own. And so what I just first want to do is before we kind of get started, and as we kind of get started, is just talk a little bit about what are we going to talk about in the next 55 minutes. So the first thing is we are going to talk about how does negotiating just fit together into the overall sales process? And we know that negotiating, it's very difficult when you talk about negotiating because a client never picks up the phone. And when they start to negotiate you says, okay, Cindy, I'm going to negotiate with you right now. So it is very difficult to understand when we are actually in a negotiation. And really, sometimes it's hard to understand what the clients value in order to better position ourselves when we are negotiating. And when we talk about what clients value, it's even more difficult with third parties because oftentimes you're negotiating with the third party who's going back and sharing that with the end client. And so we know it's very difficult to negotiate with somebody that isn't really at liberty to make that final decision. But either way, we have to think about how do we actually use these effective communication skills in order to really present great options between what the client is actually looking for and what we can realistically provide to that end third party. And then we're going to end with how do we create a win-win when it comes to negotiating using what we call quid pro quo. So a quid pro quo is a this for that. So it's basically saying, I will go ahead and give you this if you will give me that. And we're going to talk about whenever we discount anything to a third party or even to an end client, that we want to get something in return there rather than just dropping price, giving away a comp or a giveaway. So when we look at negotiating essentials to your sales success and really looking at the sales cycle, and where we kind of are looking at, if you look at the sales cycle, the first part is what we kind of talked about, I think back in December, sometime last year, is first the prospecting. It's going out and finding that business to hopefully then get to that initial sales call where you can actually properly qualify. After you properly qualify, you're presenting your proposals, you may be doing site visits, you're presenting your price. And now we're at the stage where we're trying to overcome these objections and negotiate in order to actually close the deal. Now, we will always talk about that this first part, this initial sales call or properly qualifying, that is one of the most important parts of negotiating, because if you didn't do a good job asking questions, sometimes then the desire for a discount, a comp, or a concession later on is going to be more important because whatever you presented wasn't maybe necessarily what the client really saw as value. So we know when it comes to negotiating via CVent, for example, it's very difficult to negotiate via CVent because a lot of times you don't have the opportunity to talk to that particular client. But I will tell you, even when a CVent lead comes in, it doesn't always say on those CVent leads, do not call. It doesn't always say, I just prefer email. And so we still have to make every best effort to pick up the phone, sending an email, requesting some sort of appointment so that we can properly qualify and present those great ideas. So throughout the time, those of you that have attended the webinars in the past know that we're going to have you kind of type into the chat box at different times. And so, yeah, type into the chat box. Maybe we'll have you go ahead and unmute and come on camera. But just in general, right now, I just want you to type into the chat box, what skills do you need to be a successful negotiator? What are some of the things that you personally think that we need in order to become a successful negotiator? And maybe as some of you are typing in, I might just go ahead and ask, well, why don't I go ahead and ask just because, let me just move this so I can see your faces a little bit more. That would be helpful. I will go ahead and ask, well, JJ, since I can see your face, I'm just going to call on you first. You look so happy and smiling. I'll call on some people too that also aren't on camera, but what do you think are some of the skills you need to be a successful negotiator?
I did just type it into the chat too, but I kind of just dumped a bunch of different thoughts in there. So emotional intelligence, fully qualify from the start, open-ended questions as you're probing and going through, even through the negotiating process, continue asking those open-ended questions. And then a relationship, and that can be built. It's hard to build from the break at CVent, but through the process, if you get any sort of pulse, you have an opportunity to build a relationship there. So those are some of my thoughts.
I love it. And tell me more about the emotional intelligence, because there's so many books written on, I don't know if anybody's read the book on emotional intelligence, but there's so many books on that. But just elaborate why you think emotional intelligence is important.
To uncover what's not being disclosed, especially through third parties. I feel they may not know exactly what the hot button is, but they may have gotten a sense from their client, and that sense is an emotion and emotional intelligence to dial into. So I hear you have hesitation on, moving away from inclusive pricing. Is there a reason for that? Have they booked it, contracted it in the past? And just trying to work through it that way, for example.
I love that. And that's how I would define, thank you so much for sharing, how I would define emotional intelligence. It's I'm sensing this from the client, and I like to say I'm picking up what the other person is putting down. So really, really great points there. And I think back to that, some of the emotional intelligence with the third party is we really have to look at what is their role with their end clients. Their role is to provide the best value back to their end clients. So that would be something that would be very important to them. Their role is to negotiate tough to provide that value. So it's also kind of, I think, having that emotional intelligence of saying, okay, how can I make you look good to the end user so that you're actually building your book of business and repeating this business? So thank you so much, JJ, for sharing. And I saw a couple other things, so I love, Sue, what you said, great listening skills. I find that a lot of times we're not really listening. We're just waiting to talk. And back to those great listening skills, what Sue had said is the qualification skills. And to me, the listening and qualification skills go hand in hand because that requires a lot of good note taking. I like to say you need to be taking really good notes, because if I talked to you last week and then the week before and the week before, and now I'm at the negotiation stage, well, sometimes we start to ask questions that we already know the answer to. So I think it really goes back to listening, taking really good notes. When I'm on a phone call or a Zoom call with the client and building a relationship, I write down everything that they say, even if it doesn't have anything to do with the program, the event, for me, the training, because it just helps you remember things personally about them. And I'll just use an example because many of you said the relationship is very important. I was just working with a client where she had asked me, oh, Mary, do you have any kids? And I said to her, oh, no, I don't have any children. But what was so funny is she asked me that last time we talked. So I remember that, but because of the, you're keeping your niceties. So when we really talk about, okay, how do we be confident and build relationships and be knowledgeable, which many of you had said, that also goes back to knowledge of how do we build the relationship with the client there. I also like, I think it was, I don't know who Sleobold is, but or S probably, but the confidence, you do have to have confidence and knowledge of what you do. And then also back to what Katie said, is really uncovering additional details they may not realize they might need, which also is a great thing because if they do have additional details that they might need, well, what is so great about those additional details is that we do have that all-inclusive pricing. So that would be something that would be kind of interesting to ask about. So we're going to talk about all of these, all of these kind of different points and where they kind of follow in the sales process. So the first thing is when we look at negotiating, you have to be working with somebody that really does have a genuine desire for a win-win. And we also have to think about how do we come up with a really great negotiation plan prior to the meeting. As I say, this is very difficult because it's almost a strategy, I think, of especially third parties. Is sometimes they'll call you, well, today's Monday. They'll call you on a Monday and they'll be like, Sue, oh, I just need one more thing. Then they call you on Wednesday. Oh, I just need one more thing. Then they call on Friday. Oh, I just need one more thing. That's a strategy. So sometimes we have to have and I love JJ that you're like smiling and laughing because you're like, that probably just happened to you, right? And sometimes we have to have, back to what some of you said, the confidence and the listening skills to say, before I give anything away, what else are you going to ask for later on that I need to be aware of now so I can lay out all the facts and really come up with that great plan? And then you also have to have the patience to work through the difficulties. And some of you may be a little bit more patient than others, I would say. So in the chat box, you can just go ahead. I'll just have you kind of type again. I'm going to keep talking as we go through this, but how are you currently negotiating with third parties? And which third parties, I have an idea, are you working with the most? And back to what I said is as we talk about kind of the patience to work through this as you're kind of typing in, back to what some of you had said, we are going to talk about how can we be more confident during the negotiation process? Because the second you give wish-washy answers, we want to be flexible. We want to still ask questions. But if we give a lot of wish-washy answers, sometimes that is really where the client will start to railroad over us. So that confidence, I think, is very important there. So I see, we're negotiating with HPN, Helms Briscoe, Conference Direct. If there's any other kind of third parties there, you can go ahead and put that in. So when we really look at negotiating too, and I like JJ, you said little to no communication with HPN right up front, right? Really hard to qualify. We just got to go back and forth and you just got to put your best price forward. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's hard when they come back and ask for things. So we don't have the opportunity there. But really to influence a customer, the first thing is you have to really understand what is their attitude towards you and your product. So I like to talk about attitude towards a product right now is definitely hotel rooms. I'm booking some personal holidays right now. And I had some friends that sent over, we're going to be going to the Cape for, 4th of July. And we're looking at places to stay that range from $300 a night to $3,000 a night. So when you talk about the attitude, you have to first know what is their attitude towards our product. I like to relate this also to wine. Even right now, if you like wine, let's say, I want you to raise your hand if you drink wine. You can just use the reaction. Like if you drink wine, if you like wine, you can go ahead and kind of raise your hand or give a little, I can pull up my reaction here. I see Kate likes wine. I love it. Yeah, put it in. Kara likes wine. So for example, I really like wine. I studied I almost went and got my sommelier. I used to work in food and beverage. My family owns a restaurant. I like wine. And even yesterday we were talking about, I was with a family member and we were talking about, when you go to somebody's house and you bring a bottle of wine, like how much is that bottle of wine supposed to be, right? There are some people, when you look at the attitude towards wine, They value wine. There are other people that think a $5 bottle of wine from Trader Joe's, which is a popular store in the US, is great. There are other people that want to buy a $50 bottle of wine, a $100 bottle of wine. So you have to understand what's their attitude towards our product. How do they see it? For me, I very much value wine. Some of you, even if you drink wine, are happy drinking a $10 bottle or a 10-pound bottle or something very inexpensive. So that attitude is very, very important. So the other thing is thinking about back to what all of you had said, which when we look at what all of you had said, is first thing is you have to understand, how do I properly qualify so I can go ahead and align my solutions to whatever their needs actually are? And I love, JJ, like you had said, I do personal coaching with some people from Conference Direct, right? And we know that sometimes Conference Direct, sometimes, Helms Briscoe, they do ask for everything. They give a lot of information up front. And we've noticed that in some cases, as you said, they post sourcing that they stay on as the planner, and it changes the dynamic, right? So it does go back of, did that Conference Direct planner do a good job of actually asking their client those questions there? So we look at minimizing time negotiating. One thing to remember is if all you're doing is taking an order, then, as I said, the client or the third party is going to begin to ask for more concessions. So what we really want to move is from an order taker to consultative selling. Even if they're just emailing you and asking for whatever Helms Briscoe is saying, whatever that favor is, let's say, if they're just emailing you, that's a perfect opportunity to say, I'm so happy to talk further about this. When is a good time to talk? Because it's very difficult to sell and negotiate via email. I think some of these planners, because they may be lacking confidence, because it is easier to ask for things sometimes via email, that sometimes they just think it's easier to email back and forth. And so we allow that, but we want to make sure we're trying to get them on the phone. I would say the only exception to some of these third-party planners of why it's hard to get them on the phone is because sometimes they're working on site with another client. And so it's just easier to email and make it look like they're not working, on something for another client. So if it's not a good time, that's okay. We just want to make sure that we have those questions, I like to say, or we're actually trying at least to pick up the phone or schedule a quick Teams meeting, Zoom meeting. It's because one thing I find from negotiating, and none of you are on camera, but if you're on camera, when you're negotiating, even if the client doesn't get on camera, I just find that they're nicer to you. Like they're just nicer to you. The more they're smiling, the more they're engaging with you, or you can also see their face if they're not smiling and engaging with you. But when they see your face, they see your smile, they see your energy, they just become nicer. So the first thing is, okay, how do we actually negotiate? What are some of the things that we have to consider? Everything that we've been talking about is, first of all, we do have to complete knowledge of the customer's needs. But then when our initial proposal, whatever it is that you proposed over, we do have to have knowledge of what you have that the customer wants, but also what we have that the customer doesn't care about. So even JJ, as she mentioned, the all-inclusive pricing. Sometimes people love that all-inclusive pricing. I love the all-inclusive pricing, but sometimes they don't care about that. So we have to think and be a little bit more clever, a little bit more innovative in how we actually present that. So what are some of those concessions maybe in that all-inclusive pricing that they don't actually care about, but also what are some of the things that they're actually wanting, which often is something to do with the pricing or a lower price. And then we have to have knowledge of the competition. This is very important because why do we have to have knowledge of the competition? We have to have knowledge, like, does our competition just lower the price? If they did present a room rental, do they just waive the room rental? Will they just give a bunch of upgraded suites? What is kind of their negotiating strategy? Then we have to have knowledge of what we call the buyer's behavioral styles. We define behavioral styles as it's how people communicate. So I want you to think about a client that's very direct. They will pick up the phone and they're very comfortable saying, Jennifer, I want this, this, and this. They tell you exactly what they want. When you're working with someone that's very direct, we, back to the confidence piece, have to be extremely direct back in our communication. This is where I said earlier, if you give wish-washy, like, Well, I need to kind of look into that. I need to talk to my revenue person. I might be able to do that, but that person that's very direct, they'll just like take you down. They're the person that's like, well, give me the revenue manager. I'll just talk to them if you can't make a decision. So we have to be very direct in our communication and say, you know what, let me go ahead and crunch the numbers. Let me go ahead and look a little bit more into this, and I will come back to you in 24 hours with an answer. So that's kind of communication styles. There are other styles. We call them amiables. They're very friendly. They're very cooperative. These are people that they ask for things very nicely. So sometimes they will say to you, Amber, there's just kind of one tiny thing, like if you could help me out with, it'd be really great if you could. And because they ask nicely, sometimes it's easier to come out and just say, no, we can't do that, because they're nice and they're friendly. But in the back of their mind, to that individual, sometimes that's their way of saying, if you don't give this to me, I'm ghosting you and I'm taking my business elsewhere. So you really have to pick up and mirror those communication styles of the clients that you're working with. Then you have to have knowledge of your own decision-making limits. There's always negotiating power, okay? You have to know how low you can go. And at the end of the day, profit is king. So when we look at moving into 2024, understanding the overall profitability of every meeting, event, anything that you're ever booking, you have to actually understand what are our decision-making limits and how much money do I make off of this? And then you can know what percentage profit do we want to make? What number of profitability do we need to make? And that can very much help you during those decision-making times. And then having an understanding of what are those issues that are going to come up on either side. So one thing that you all said as being a successful negotiator is that effective negotiation starts at the beginning, which is through our probing process. In order to find out what your clients want, you got to find out, what our clients actually want before they ask for it. And because you do work with Conference Direct, because you do work with Helms Briscoe and HPN, you have a good idea of some of the things that they're actually going to be asking for earlier on. But this goes back that if you did not have the opportunity to speak to the client when they are negotiating, you want to go back to that probing process. It's best to do it right at the beginning, but if you didn't have an opportunity because it was through CVent, it was through a planner that didn't want to talk with you, the second negotiation starts, I do need to start off with this probing process. And what I find is that when it comes to decision-making questions, sometimes we actually aren't that great at asking decision-making questions. We want to be asking, what are the goals of this negotiation or of these negotiation points? How can I earn your business? How can I earn your loyalty? Where are we in the selection process? Are we the first choice, or where are we in the selection process? We want to make sure we're asking too, because this affects negotiating. We want to make sure that we're asking about future business. What other future business do you have? Because that could also, if we can, get something else on the books that may then factor in. We want to be asking if it is these third parties, who else can you go ahead and introduce us to within Conference Direct, within Helms Briscoe? So that way, we're actually determining where we can really negotiate right there. Remembering too, that the second you ask those open-ended questions, those broad probes, you then have to focus in on the answer. So when you say, how can I earn your business? And they say, well, just lower the price. You're like, great, right? But you still ask, how can I earn your business? So I still want to say, in addition to lowering your price, like, how else can I earn your business? How low is low? Because we know that price isn't necessarily the only reason that people actually buy things. So how do we actually create value in your price? If you look at like this little teeter-totters, and we'll focus on the teeter-totters down at the bottom first. First of all, if we just lower the price, and we put the value up here, the customer wins. If we're too hard, we don't just want to drop price, right? But at the same time, if we're too hard-nosed and keep the price up here and don't provide any value, then we win. What we really want to create is a win-win, which means that the price matches the value for what it is that we're offering. And as an IAC property, there are so many things that your customer can value. So when we look at that value and the price, we want to create that win-win of finding, okay, what is the amount of money that we can charge that the customer sees value in it, and also that we are very comfortable at. So what that also means is, back to the questions, is we got to be thinking about those questions. One of my favorite questions at that proposal stage is, what else should I take into consideration before I submit a proposal? What else might your associates ask for later that I should be aware of now? When it comes to third-party planners, we know that they book during the sale, after the sale, and when they get their final bill. We know that the person that comes on site to actually manage the program sometimes is different than the person that actually booked the program. So for example, that person sometimes has different needs and different expectations. So we have to make sure that we're asking, again, these better questions there. So my favorite here, though, is saying, if you have the opportunity to talk to them, is, in addition to you, is there anybody else that I should be copying in on the contract or the proposal to? Can you go ahead and tell me, future business? Can you tell me about the other programs that you like to plan? Share with me, how strict are these price parameters? Can you walk me through and explain the decision-making process? What is most important to you? And asking those better questions. And so I like to say that you want to ask the questions that you want to ask, but sometimes are afraid to ask. Now, those of you, nobody really put in here as a successful negotiator. I think JJ, you mentioned the emotional intelligence, but I think patience is very important. So you have to remember that you can't get frustrated. You can't just go like, okay, when are you really going to sign? Or I don't know about you. I was just negotiating with a client, and they asked me to drop my price very, very low. And if you ever wanted to go, is this a joke? I can't just because the price was way up here. Now you're asking for something way down here. And you can't be like, is this a joke? So what are some of those questions that you can go ahead and ask that don't come off as offensive? So I would never suggest that you'd go, okay, is this a joke? But I just want to go, okay, what is the possibility of us reaching an agreement? How can we make this a win-win? Because I can't send, a trainer for 3 days at that price, because I'm not even going to break even on my trainer price. So how can we go ahead and kind of meet in the middle? Can we reevaluate your expectations? Can we move the meeting from a 3 days to 1 days? What are kind of those top goals there? And we know as a trend that in 2023, as we also move into 2024 with inflation, is that one of the goals of 2024 is that if people can't afford you, if the meeting's 3 days, they're going to move to 2 days. If it's 2 days, it's going to move to 1 day. So they're going to reduce some of the requirements, and they're going to reduce the number of people. So when we negotiate, one thing that's very critical is that you want to head off what we say surprises. When people catch you off guard, we're more likely to give things away, a comp, a concession, a lower rate, a discount. This even happens when somebody just emailed me, and we're negotiating, and she had said it's for a keynote speech. We presented our price. She came back with a lower price. It wasn't much lower, okay? But then she had said, if this was over, over the phone, it's a little bit different. Then she had said, as we talked about in the phone call, I'm just a little hesitant of paying for all the travel expenses because her city and destination is very expensive this time of year. So I practiced what I preach. I picked up the phone, gave her a call. The second she goes, well, can you just go ahead and can we just say a flat fee for travel expenses? I'll take care of your hotel, but I'm only going to give you $500 for travel expenses. Quickly in the moment, the first thing I just want to go, $500, that seems, because based off of her destination, and I'm coming from LA, it's about a 3-hour flight. I'm like, oh, that's actually really, really great. I'm so glad. Quickly though, I said, let me go ahead and pause and do some research. Most of us right in the moment go, oh, she's going to pay $500 for the plane ticket. Great. But we're not factoring in, okay, what's the cost of Ubers or Lyfts and transportation? We're not kind of thinking full picture. So in the moment, for just a second, I almost committed to it. Well, when I went and did my research of what the plane ticket was actually going to cost, the plane ticket was going to cost a minimum of $500. And that's if I booked it right then and there. And then also all the transportation costs. I was going to have to be traveling an hour from the airport to get to where the meeting, where this keynote speech was going to be. I had to do a little cost analysis there. So when you're caught off guard, you're more likely to give things away. And when you give things away, at the end of the day, because this was just a keynote speech, I go, I'm losing even more money, right? Than actually showing up, because I have to pay maybe $500 even more in all the transportation costs to and from the airport. So you don't want to be caught off pause. When somebody asks for something, it's okay to hit the patience button and say, let me go ahead and do a little bit more research on this. So how do you create a win-win? The first thing is we have to look at what negotiating is. Negotiating is a fair exchange. As I said, we're trying to find that price to value. It's a fair exchange. One thing with negotiating, I love how children negotiate. So some of you may have children. Children are the best negotiators. If you actually, because my niece, she's 3 years old. Okay. She was just at my house. I said, okay, eat all your vegetables, then you can have some ice cream and cookies. She goes, well, if I eat all my vegetables, I want 2 scoops of ice cream. She's 3 years old and she's this tiny little button. She's tiny. She's very tall and skinny for her age. So we want her to eat the ice cream. We're trying to bulk her up a little bit. And it's so quick that children will say that because they think that's fair. She eats all of her vegetables. She gets 2 scoops of ice cream. It's the value for price right there. The other thing that I love about children negotiating is that they're really quick to go, well, that's not fair. I'm not going to eat all my vegetables. That's not fair. So how come in business, we're not good at saying, well, that's not fair? Like, that's kind of part of this. I'm like, in business, sometimes we have to say, well, that's not fair. The other thing with children, so Pokemon cards have made a big comeback here in the United States. I don't know, when I was a child, Pokemon cards were not a thing, but my brother was obsessed with Pokemon cards. He's a little bit younger with me, and the Pokemon cards got banned from school. And I know now because my other cousin, her child is like 6 years old, Pokemon cards have made a comeback. So when my brother would come to home from school, okay, and he'd have different Pokemon cards, he'd come into my room and he'd go, Mary, I exchanged the Abracadabra, which is a real Pokemon card, by the way. I exchanged the Abracadabra for 2 of these other, I don't even know what they were, some other Pokemon cards. And he goes, look at what I got. I don't even get it, okay, because I didn't get it. But he would give up 1 card to sometimes get 2 cards. Sometimes he'd give away 3 cards to get 1 card. And when children negotiate, if it's not fair, they're not going to trade their cards. So same thing has to go in business. What we're trying to do is build for the long term and find that fair exchange. What we don't want to do is be working though with clients that think it's a game. So back to, and just what was in the chat box with, sometimes we have clients that just ask for everything. Sometimes we have clients that, they ask for it once and it just goes on their list. We've almost trained these third parties, if they ask, they receive. If they ask, they receive. So it's not a game. It's not getting in. It's not conceding. What we're really trying to do is making sure that we're building, as I said, for the long term, but building a fair exchange that's a good win for the hotel and for the conference center and for you and for your owners. And then also building on that relationship for the client. So just in the chat box right now, you can go ahead and chime in, and I might just have somebody unmute here, is that when you leave a negotiation giving more than you wanted, which it always happens, like, how do you justify that? And what I might do is, how about Amber? Are you there, Amber? Why don't you go ahead and unmute and just kind of share, when you leave a negotiation, like you gave more than you wanted, how do you justify that? Is she there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you for unmuting. Appreciate it.
All right. So when you leave a negotiation giving more than what you wanted, how do you justify that?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Hold on.
There's no wrong answer. There's no wrong answer, whatever your opinion is.
Well, a lot of time it's also based on experience. So if I negotiated more than I anticipated, I would just ensure that the experience was great so that I know that in the future I would have someone who would be willing to come back and then go from there.
Yeah. So kind of what some of your other colleagues are typing in the chat box, like building on for the long term, which I think is great. And to your point, I mean, if they did negotiate us very low, I think too, we would want to make sure that we're justifying the profitability, that maybe it was a need time or a need period, or, we're keeping our people working. I mean, sometimes it can even be that way. So thank you for sharing, Amber. And then I see some of you had typed in, it is about, the health of the long-term relationship. We are hoping they're going to bring more business in the future. And if we do, and I love JJ, we said we tie extra concessions to a contract due date, for example, to hit the crossover goal. So obviously, if we're going to give away something, how do we justify it? Well, I'm going to get the contract back in 24 hours, or I'm going to go ahead and have the deposit back in, well, right now we're nearing the end of, almost the end of the month. So how do we actually kind of near that? So all great points there. So when we look at all of this, concessions alone, we really have to think about this, because I like this little bubble right here. It says your job is to influence and sell to the customer, to these third parties, on your exchanges versus a concession. So when we say an exchange, if we are trying to build for the long term, if I'm going to lower the pricing structure, well, I'm going to ask for in return is that they do give me a referral, that they do, guarantee me that they would source me or a sister property, let's say, in the future. Like, why can't I get that into the contract in order to actually get an exchange there? So I mentioned this earlier, every single time we just give something away, we say sometimes we call it the no problem syndrome. So for example, somebody calls, oh, can we go ahead and add a couple more suite upgrades? And we're like, yeah, no problem. Can we go ahead and send a couple more amenities now to those guest rooms? We're like, yeah, no problem. And all of a sudden, when we say no problem, what we're really actually saying is we actually aren't making any money. So this goes back to the no problem means no profit. So when we ever discount anything, we always want to make sure that we're getting something in return. Getting something in return is very important because we want to make sure, as we said, that we are building for the long term. We don't want this client to come back the next year and say, well, this is all the pricing you gave us, and it was a great deal last year. We're looking for the same deal, right? Then we're put in an adverse situation. So as a professional, I like to use the example of like when I go to, well, it could be any store. Here in the US, I like to shop at Nordstrom's. Normally, I don't walk into Nordstrom's and say, oh, Nordstrom's, I just bought 3 new shirts. Can you give me one for free? Now, unless you work with a personal shopper, you may get one for free, but that's not necessarily how it works. It's not like if you book 3 hotel rooms, you get one for free, right? So we really have to go back to justifying the value. But guess what? If I am that Nordstrom's personal shopper, they make a great commission, I will say, because I've had several friends that have worked there, that yes, maybe they would give you a free something, but what they're going to say is, I will go ahead and give you an extra shirt for free. But what I am going to ask for in return is that we get your holiday shopping for Christmas done, because it was just the holidays, in November rather than in December. What do you think about that? They're getting something in return because it's guaranteeing that you're going to actually come back and shop with them more. So back to the probing process, if you actually don't know the customer's needs, sometimes then we didn't sell them on any value. So that is when we didn't sell them at any value. So that's when a comp or concession becomes more important. The other thing is sometimes, and this has happened to me, where yes, if we negotiated something very, very low, and I get it, if we negotiated something very, very low, totally fine. But sometimes what happens is when that person objects to something then when they're on property. So for example, we negotiated the rate low, we gave them every comp and concession they wanted. When they come on site, when they start to ask for things and they're very nitpicky, sometimes that lack of fairness starts to create some distance and sabotage. So I start to tell my banqueting team, I mean, I've done this, like whatever you do, if they ask for, bottled water for the speaker, we're going to charge for that. Like, because this is happening. I'm like, we're going to charge for that. I'm starting to sabotage you because you got me so low and took so much advantage of me that now I'm starting to create a little distance from you. So really, this is why the fairness is so important. So in order to create fairness, what we want to do is offer a quid pro quo. A quid pro quo is a value to value. As I said earlier, I will give you this if you give me that. And a good negotiation is always getting something for something. So when we look at this, getting a value to value, and you can go ahead and type this in, what does a win-win look like into the chat box? Really, when we look at, excuse me, we look at a value to value, we're always trying to get something in return. So for example, a lot of times of what your clients are actually asking for. They're asking for, complimentary, excuse me, I think I have a little cold right now too. What are they asking for? They're asking for, lower attrition. They're asking for larger rooms. They're asking for lower pricing. They're asking for complimentary welcome receptions or transportation, let's say, anything that they're asking for. But what we have to really do is think about, what do we want to ask for in return? So let me just go ahead and Sue, how about I have you go ahead and unmute, and why don't you share, what does a win-win look like to you? It might just be a signed contract, but go ahead and share with us. Oh, she just put in there too.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you're going to give additional concessions, making sure that they're high value to the client and hopefully low value or low cost to you, because what you don't want to do is if something that's really low value to the client and cost you a ton, and that doesn't make sense. But if it's low value, and they value it highly, that's a great negotiation.
I love that. Yes. So great points. And to your point, sometimes too, when a client sends over the whole list of concessions, we look at things that Sue had just said, things that are low value to us or easy. I like to say they're easy to give away. And sometimes we're like, okay, we'll just give these things away to you. But really what you still want to do is pick up the phone and say, okay, you just sent over a list of 10 concessions. Let's rate them in order from 1 to 10. Most important to least important. Because sometimes how Americans negotiate different than over in Europe. But typically, rather more team decisions could be affecting, in other countries. But typically, whatever they rated most important, if you can go ahead and get those 1, 2, or 3 negotiation points and actually solve those issues, whatever's at the bottom of the list isn't going to be as important if you can get those top things. Sometimes what happens though is those things at the bottom of their list are those things that are very low cost back to us. So we give those away very quickly when they weren't the biggest things. So that's where, back to what Sue said, is we just want to make sure that we are evaluating, okay, you sent over all this list of things that you're looking for. Really then, out of all that list of things that they're looking for, what are the things that are most important? Because even all those things that are low value, if they ask for 3 things that are low value, the cost of those 3 things may end up to 1 thing that's of high value to this customer, but also high cost to us. So just kind of considering that. So when we look at the quid pro quo and really thinking about how you're going to ask for things in return, right? We know what the customer is asking for, but then we got to think about, what can we personally ask for in return? And as we kind of talk about this, I'd encourage you to just type into the chat box, what are some things that you can ask for from a client in return? So if they do ask for a lower price, special amenities, favors, what can we ask for? 1, we can ask for volume. We can ask for a multi-year contract. We can ask for referral. We can ask them to shift their dates. There's lots of things that you can go ahead and ask for in return. So you can go ahead and type those into the chat box, and you kind of want to think about, it doesn't have to be either or, but what is the customer asking for? And then what can we ask for in return? So, things that I think that you can ask for in return is, offsite activities. If they are going offsite, let's say for an evening, well, let's bring those offsite activities back on site. If they ask for 24-hour holds, we can ask for those 24-hour holds back, right? Sue typed in the multi-year contract. JJ had mentioned earlier, quick contract turnaround. We could ask for maybe a preferred supplier status, maybe on their intranet or something. We could ask for referrals within their company or organization. Can you introduce me to 2 or 3 other planners at Helms Briscoe? Sue had mentioned, the pattern change, the date change. which I think is always great. Also, I think some of the things is just going back to some of the attrition. You can always revisit some of that, renegotiating pre and post dates, asking for testimonials. Testimonial means that maybe the client would get on a camera and talk about how great their experience was with us. So just kind of thinking about what are all those things that I can ask for in return. And I like to say with group business, with like a Helms Briscoe, Commerce Direct, with group business, it's so much easier, right? Because you got to spread it all out and look at everything and go, okay, let me go ahead and look at all of this. Maybe it's actually, if they ask for a lot of breakouts, taking some of those breakouts back. Like, can they use a general session room? So then that would actually give us the opportunity to resell some of those breakout rooms. So obviously, there's many advantages of a fair exchange, right? We want to avoid the win-lose. We want to create those future opportunities. But also, the biggest thing to me is this first one, improving our position with the client and with the third party. We do want to come off as flexible. We do want to come off as growing our position. I like to say within Helms Briscoe, starting to become more aware to other planners as somebody that's easy to do business with. So how do we actually negotiate? So those of you that have attended webinars in the past, we've talked about this LEAP process, which is how we negotiate. How do we handle objections? And LEAP stands for listen, empathize, ask, and produce. And so when you negotiate, your produce is always that quid pro quo. And so again, what we're doing is we're listening to whatever it is that they're looking for. So if we are going to go ahead, let's just say lower the price, the all-inclusive price. The first thing is we're going to actually listen to what it is they have to say. Then we want to empathize. I appreciate you letting me know that you want the all-inclusive food and beverage pricing to be lowered by 10%. But then I have to ask some questions. Who are you comparing us to? What have you paid in the past? How flexible is your pricing? I got to ask a lot of questions so then I can actually produce that solution. And basically what we're trying to say in this solution is I will go ahead and do my best to give you what you want, but I need your help in making this possible. So I can go ahead and lower that food and beverage pricing by 10%. But what I'm going to ask for in exchange is that I noticed you had an offsite event, on the Tuesday night. Are you able to bring that offsite event back on site? And then we can go ahead and lower the total food and beverage pricing, all-inclusive food and beverage pricing by 10%, or, our all-inclusive pricing by 10%. What do you think about that? I might not actually say, does that sound fair to you? But essentially that's what I'm saying. I will go ahead and lower the price by the X amount that you're looking for. What I want to go ahead and ask you is, if I'm able to do that, are you able to introduce me to 2 more Helms Briscoe meeting planners that book in my area? Like, what do you think about that? That's going to be a fair exchange. Same thing. I will go ahead, whatever the price, I'm just using price again, back to what Sue said, I will go ahead and lower the price. What I'm asking in return is, can you go ahead and shift the pattern to a Sunday to a Tuesday versus the Monday to a Wednesday? Okay. So you're always making sure that after you empathize, after you ask some questions, then you can go ahead and produce that solution. The asking questions is very important, because the first thing is I can't ask you to shift the date and pattern if I didn't ask you why the pattern. So if they said, can you go ahead and lower the price? Same thing. You're going to listen. I'm going to empathize. Certainly, let's go ahead and look at the overall price. Let me ask you some questions. Why this pattern? Why this date? Because if the date is hard set because that's the only date the CEO is available, well, then shifting the pattern is not going to work. So that's where they're asking questions before producing the quid pro quo. It's very, very critical. So some final comments about negotiating. The first thing is that you have to have some excitement for your ideas. If you're not excited, I just love this picture right here. Doesn't this little girl look so cute and excited? If you're not actually excited, then it's not that exciting to actually go with your ideas. So for example, if I'm actually positioning, what I said, if I'm able to lower the price by 10%, but what I'm going to ask for in return is for you to bring that offsite activity back on site. What do you think about that? And they're like, yeah, I guess maybe. Well, then I got to come up with an unbelievable over the top event that we're going to do at the hotel. I can't just go and we're going to do dinner in the restaurant. I have to say, well, great. I have some really wonderful ideas. my thought would be is that we can actually do a whole poker tournament here rather than doing it offsite. We can do a Great Gatsby theme. We can go ahead and do a space theme. We're going to do something very fun and exciting. And it's also going to help you save on transportation costs. And you got to sound excited about it. And if you're excited about it, the client gets excited about it. But you can't be dull. So yeah, we can go ahead and lower the price, but could you take that offsite activity and bring it back on site to our ballroom? That's not exciting. So back to the excitement, sometimes that's even more important than even whatever it is that you're proposing. So back to kind of in conclusion, some critical strategies. The first thing is this is how you actually plan out negotiating. The first thing is actually understanding the customer's needs through asking all of those great questions. Then you got to know how you can add value. Whenever you give anything away, always put a dollar figure behind it or whatever currency you're working in. So with amenities, I'm going to go ahead and give away an amenity to you. And if they're asking for 3 amenities, I'm going to say that's a total of $150. If it's $50 an amenity, what I'm going to ask for in return is, then you're planning and preparing using quid pro quo. So even if we take that $150, I'm going to say, wonderful. So what I'm going to do, JJ, is I'm happy to go ahead and give 3 extra amenities to you. That is a value of $150. What I'm going to ask for, though, in return, if you're able to do for me, which I would greatly appreciate for giving you these amenities, is for you to go ahead and introduce me to 1 or 2 other Helms Briscoe's conference planners. Would you be able to do that? Because that would really help me justify giving away these 3 amenities. What do you think about that? That's going to come off so great. And then we're negotiating, as I just showed, with that LEAP process. So the negotiating actually plan. The most powerful aspect of negotiating is the complete plan. But as I said earlier, a client doesn't pick up the phone or send you an email and say, well, I'm going to negotiate now. I think a negotiation starts from the first moment you got the lead. Because 1, they were interested. So you have to go back to what Sue had said. What do they value? What does a third party value? Third parties value their reputation. A third party values that they look really good back to their end client. So that's what we have to think about that they value. And then we have to think about how can we earn their business? Like, what will it take to get the business and who is that kind of competition there? So with the competition and with some traps here, some traps is that if you have a lack of preparation, so it's kind of what I said when you're caught off guard. If you actually don't know the customer, you're just guessing what they actually value. Don't guess, actually know. And then, as I said, not being enthusiastic with your ideas. So one thing that you all said at the beginning, which I was so happy to hear, and I'm just going to look back at the chat box. What are the skills that you need to be a successful negotiator? A lot of you mentioned relationship, knowledge. Relationship came up again. So when I look at the relationship, whether you're selling B2B, business to business, or B2C, business direct to the consumer, what is more important is H to H. It's humans doing business with other humans. One thing that we know, this came out of focus groups from Skift, American Express, our own focus groups that we've been conducting at Master Connection Associates, is that 2024 is the year of rebuilding relationships with our hotel partners and people on site. Because what happened is we were so busy in 2023, everybody's going through the rat race, that now we want to know who is the person on site that's going to be there for me? Who is that salesperson? And we call that the H to H. It's humans doing business with other humans. So the customer of the future, and you can just Google like meeting trends in 2024, all about rebuilding the relationships, is looking for somebody that they trust. What we're also hearing from third-party planners is that they're really frustrated working with people that do not have the ability to make a decision. So if you can't make a decision in the moment and you constantly have to go back to somebody, this is slowing down the sales process and the negotiation process. That's why coming up with the negotiation plan and being very knowledgeable is so important. And every single time you have to go, oh, I got to go double check, or I'm not sure if I can do that, trust is lost. So if you can, if you are new in your position and you don't know everything that you know, get better at asking questions. Then you hit the pause button and say, great, now that I've asked you all the questions, I want to go ahead and brainstorm, how I can go ahead and meet some of this pricing demands or some of these concessions. and making sure that you're focusing on a very partnership atmosphere that's based off of a win-win for both of us. But I always challenge you, because I do work with a lot of conference direct planners in Helms Briscoe, as I said, and we do one-on-one coaching with them. When they're asking for things, they're not asking because it's just fun. They're not just going, I have this big list because it's fun. I mean, that's part of their job. So they're asking because they see value within that. So we have to remember that this is about building trust there and also making sure it's a win-win for all parties involved. But lastly, you have to know when to walk away. You have to know when this is not a good business deal, when it is based off of the other person and not on us. So you have to know what is the walk away a price. We have to make sure that we are prepared to tell the customer in a very nice way, we just can't go any lower, at some point, and really looking at how we say that. So even, for example, if we have to walk away, I like to say every single time we turn down business, before we turn down that business, I'd be asking about future business. What other meetings are you planning? What other meetings in the area? Like, tell me more about what else you're working on, because we know that this comes directly from Cvent, that like 80% of planners that are planning something right now are also planning one or two other events currently in the future. So we have to be prepared to say, okay, maybe not so great of a fit, but what can I go ahead and help you with in the future? So with that, if you have any questions, you can come off mute. You can go ahead and type those into the chat box if you prefer. But I want to thank you all for your time and energy. I appreciate all of you that typed in the chat box and those of you that I called on you off mute. And as always, our commitment at Master Connection Associates is that if you do have any question or you are dealing with a tough negotiation and you want to go ahead and discuss that, Kate has all of our contact details. So please go ahead and just reach out to us. We're always happy to get on a quick phone call with you to walk through some of the things that we discussed. So I'm happy to stay on for a couple more minutes, but with that, I wish you all a great rest of your day and thank you so much. Thank you, JJ. Thank you, Sue. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.